Hey everyone, it's Mary Brownlee, licensed professional counselor and trauma therapist. I apologize. I've been out for a few weeks, close to a month actually. I've been pretty ill, so had to take some time off. So a virus took me out. So for my regulars, if you haven't seen me for a while, that's what's been going on. But today we're going to talk about the stress cycle. And specifically, we're going to talk about why it's so important for trauma survivors to complete a stress cycle in order for trauma to resolve itself. And other things like just chronic stress and even like anxiety and depression can be helped by resolving stress cycles. So, what exactly is a stress cycle? Let's get into that. We'll talk about what it looks like, why it's there, and also the importance of resolution for us to be our most whole and healthy human self so that we can adapt and better live our lives without the chronic stress that can really add a negative impact into our mental health as well as our physical health. So if you find this video helpful, please leave a like. Feel free to leave a comment. It helps me to know what target areas to do in my future videos that you guys are finding helpful. So thank you so much, and let's get right into it. All right, the stress cycle really, in a nutshell, is our body's way of surviving. Back in the caveman days, as I like to say, human beings faced a lot more threats than our modern day environment now. We could actually get killed while out on a hunt, or even like eating food could be potentially dangerous, for example. So we faced like threats that actually, threatened our survival, for example, at a much higher level than we currently do in modern times. So modern stresses are a little bit different, for example, that maybe that boss that's kind of a jerk, or maybe that family member who you have a lot of conflict with, for example, still stressful, right? But not quite to the same life-threatening degree that, say, a lion hunting you in the bush would be. But what's important to recognize is that the stressors that we face today, what's interesting about that is that our body is still responding to today's stressors with the exact same high degree of threat response as they would a lion in the bush. Like our body cannot tell the difference between that nasty coworker or an alligator rushing at us, in Florida, God forbid, So that's my point here, that the body has this automatic fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, the 4 F's here, talk about that in some of my other videos, that are basically automatic processes where our brain detects threat in an instantaneous second and way outside of our conscious thought. The brain responds rapidly with neurochemicals and hormones to help us stay safe, basically, by either running away from the threat as fast as we can, potentially fighting off the threat. If an animal attacks us, we might be able to survive if we fight it off, or even that freeze or play dead, essentially where you go into this frozen state of trying to survive just by playing dead. Fawn is the fourth one. That's a little bit different. That involves people pleasing. Again, I talk about that in some of my other videos, but we'll really be talking more about that fight, flight, freeze specifically. Those first three really are the instantaneous, automatic response that our body has to perceived threats in the environment. So what happens is when our nervous system gets engaged like this, things like cortisol and adrenaline course through the body very rapidly to prepare the body to be mobilized. For example, extra oxygen is going to our muscles. Our digestive system is kind of shutting down, right? We don't need to be digesting food if we're running or fighting. And it's really prepping the muscles here to help the body escape the threat. So ideally, what would happen, and what you see in the wild, is that animals have a natural stress response and a completion of the stress cycle that allows them to kind of go back to grazing peacefully, for example. Robert Sapolsky, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, was kind of the first, at least that I'm aware of, to kind of talk about this stress response and how important it is to complete it. For example, in the wild, you don't see zebras having ulcers. And, it's like, well, biologists were like, why is this? Why is it that human beings are riddled with all sorts of stress responses, related to chronic stress and trauma, but you don't see it in animals, right? And they face death and kind of serious, problems on a regular basis, starvation, So what they find is that when you observe animals, for example, say a zebra is getting chased by a lion, you'll see the zebra immediately start to run. and say the lion chases after it. So we know the zebra's body is getting lots of hormones involved here to prepare the muscles to run as fast as they possibly can, extra sugar and oxygen being, flowing through the body here. And say the lion grabs the back leg of the zebra and brings it down. And you'll see the zebra go into like a freeze, where it's like play dead here. And then say the lion thinks, okay, I've successfully killed the zebra. Let me go back to my pack here and let them know, hey, dinner's on the table. Come on over. What you'll see essentially is this zebra has the capacity to get up right out of that freeze response, run off to safety, and then you'll see the body kind of do this shaking response. And then after the shaking response is done, the zebra will go back to just grazing peacefully as if nothing has occurred. So this is the completion of a stress cycle. This is what it looks like. The body is mobilized. It either runs or fights or does what it needs to do to escape the threat. And then the stress cycle completes and the organism is allowed to just kind of go back to its resting baseline. All right, so now let's talk about the difference in human beings, right? Because that is part of the problem why PTSD and like anxiety and depression and chronic stress is really in our bodies to a very high degree and doesn't really resolve itself, is because as human beings, we're not very good at completing stress cycles. Whether that's because, for example, things like it's not appropriate to scream back at our boss and attack them, so we have to like keep our physical reaction kind of appropriate, so a lot of this is we're potentially blocking a normal stress cycle through things like appropriate behaviors that are not allowed, or fear, for example, we don't want backlash, or maybe cultural messages, like a lot of women stuff a lot of their anger, for example. Anger is a very big protector emotion. And when we've been wronged and abused, for example, a lot of us as trauma survivors stay silent, right? So what happens is we're not actually able to protect ourselves. And so that stress cycle is still in the body, not completed. And so that's really what medicine, the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, I've talked about that in one of my other videos, really discovered years ago that chronic stress and trauma can actually have negative health outcomes. Things like being tied to like cancer and strokes and heart disease and early death even. Because what we now know is that cortisol, that primary stress hormone that's activated during the stress response, can actually kill us at high levels and for a long enough period of time. It breaks our organs down. It's not good for the body whatsoever. The body's not meant to have high levels of cortisol all the time. That's not normal. So trauma survivors, we know, have a very high level of cortisol levels. Pretty frequently. You'll see actually a lot of my own clients that I treat for trauma, and myself included as a trauma survivor, have very commonly chronic health conditions. So you'll see things like fibromyalgia and IBS and Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. And I have clients with like POTS, for example, or cyclical vomiting, or fibromyalgia, if I didn't mention that one. But yeah, like chronic pain, very commonly. And it is theorized that a lot of these conditions in trauma survivors are, again, from that chronic stress levels that is in our bodies and uncompleted. So what we now know is that you can actually complete stress cycles and resolve them. And the quickest way to do that, by the way, highly recommend this book. They talk about this stress cycle as well. This is Dr. Amelia Nagoski and her sister Amelia Nagoski. Fabulous, fabulous book here for women and for trauma survivors. I highly recommend. But what we know is the most efficient way to complete that stress cycle is through exercise. So we have to speak the body's language. The body speaks in somatic energy. It's that movement and feeling. It speaks a different language than the brain. The brain is up here with like cognitive and thoughts and like the emotional world, but the body speaks a different language. It speaks in movement. So how we most effectively can complete a stress cycle is through exercise. And actually, I have a personal experience with this. When my post-traumatic stress disorder was through the roof years ago, my son was a baby at the time, so about 14 years ago, I unknowingly, I would say, maybe even saved my life through running. I didn't note at the time that that's what I was doing, but I started to actively run. And I ran on a pretty regular basis, anywhere from like 30 to 45 minutes most days of the week. And what I found naturally over time is that when I would be out on my run, I was thinking about different things that were painful and bothered me. But then by the time I got back after the run, I was calm. And I was calm the rest of the night, and my breathing was calm. The anxiety and panic attacks would go down. I would sleep better at night, and things got a lot better for me. What I didn't know at the time is that I was inadvertently completing stress cycles. And so that's very much what Dr. Nagoski and her sister talk about in their book, as well as Robert Sapolsky and Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, that to speak the body's language through physical movement is really the most effective and quickest way to get in there at those physical symptoms that trauma survivors have. Things like panic attacks, chronic tension in the body, not breathing calmly and deeply, which again, definitely plays directly into our panic symptoms. And the body's having a hard time resting, right? So when you go out and you physically move your body enough to really get out that stress response, essentially it cues the body for safety, that things are safe again, and it can go back to baseline and relax. Now, as trauma survivors, if you have complex trauma too, that layers after layers of trauma over the years, like one and done obviously is not going to work. Like none of us would say that this is a quick and easy fix, for example, if only. But actually, I do tell most of my clients, this is going to be your most rapid and quickest direct access into the body's physical stress response. And I noticed it right away when I started running, and I continued it for years after that. And I now know, looking back, that that probably was one of the biggest predictors of me getting better in a natural way from PTSD. Of course, doesn't replace therapy, doesn't replace medication if needed, but this is a wonderful, like really, if I would say a triad in the healing from trauma, is therapy, medication if needed, and running or some type of physical movement. It doesn't have to be running, for example, walking, yoga, dancing, even jumping up and down. You know, Dr. Nagoski said something as simple as jumping up and down or a good cry can release some of that physical stress in the body. But there's other methods too. So for my clients who have like physical health conditions that movement is hard for them, I suggest things like swimming if you can. You know, swimming is great and much easier on the joints and the body if you have access to it. Find creative ways, maybe an elliptical machine so it's easier on your joints, for example. Finding some way to physically move the body is going to be your best ally here. But there are other things like a social engagement. So using our social engagement system of laughter and connection to loved ones and safe people, that also helps the body come out of fight or flight and complete a stress cycle. So I'm hoping that this information was helpful for you. I wanted to get it out there as one of probably the best tools out there to help trauma survivors and those with chronic mental health conditions and chronic stress to start to feel better and empower you, right? This is like a tool in the toolbox where we start to feel a little more empowered and less helpless to make things better. Because that helplessness and feeling like nothing ever works is really hard on trauma survivors and people with chronic stress and other debilitating mental health conditions. And so this is going to be your best friend here in your journey of healing and getting better. So I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, again, please leave a like, subscribe, ask me any questions. I'm happy to be as helpful as I possibly can. And as always, I love talking to all of you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care, everyone.